attended kindergarten and part of first grade at an all-black school where everyone in the school looked exactly like me. My teachers, all of the kids, people that worked at the school, everybody looked like me. And that was normal for us. My parents were approached by an organization called the NAACP, who was spearheading this movement of changing laws, just as they did when we as African Americans were fighting for the right to vote. Because as you know, there was a time when we couldn't vote. And so when that knock came at the door to ask my parents if they would be willing to send their child, if indeed they had a 6-year-old child, would they be willing to send their child to one of these integrated schools for the very first time in the city? Well, I have to say that my parents jumped at the opportunity. And as my parents said, "You better behave." And that was the only thing that I was concentrating on. But that day did seem different. All of our neighbors that lived next door to us, they came outside of their homes and they stood in the streets and they waited until I got dressed for school. And as I walked down those stairs and got into the car with those 4 very tall white men, because that's all they seemed to me, I had no idea that they were U.S. Marshals sent by the President of the United States. And indeed, that is what they said. They knocked on the door and they said, "We are here to escort you and your daughter to school today. We have been sent by the President of the United States." And so I remember getting into the car with them. 2 of them sat in the front seat and 2 in the back, and we got into the car and started this very short drive to my new school. And the minute I turned the corner and got in front of the building, I saw mobs and mobs of people standing out in front of the school. They were carrying signs and protesting. They were screaming and shouting and throwing things. But living in New Orleans and being accustomed to what we call carnival or Mardi Gras, that's exactly what it looked like to me. I remember being in the car and thinking to myself, today is Mardi Gras. I'm in a parade. Finally, the bell rang. Someone came into the office and they said, "School is dismissed. You can leave." And I remember sitting there in the office and thinking, this school is easy. The innocence of a child. What was actually happening? Everyone in the city knew that the laws had changed, that the schools were going to be integrated, but no one knew which schools. And so all of those people showed up that day with their kids to take them to school, but they waited outside. And when I drove up with federal marshals, they knew it was their school. So the minute I got inside of the office, what was happening is every one of those parents rushed into the office, past that window where I was sitting, screaming and pointing, went into every classroom, and they pulled out every child. Over 500 kids was taken out of school that day, and it was because I was there. The door opened and this woman stepped out. She stepped out of the door and she said, "Hi, my name is Mrs. Henry and I am your teacher." And I have to honestly say, I remember standing there and looking at her and thinking, she's white. I'd never seen a white teacher before. Not to mention, she looked exactly like all of the people outside, the mob that was screaming and shouting. So even at 6 years old, I really didn't know what to expect from her. But she said, "Come in and take a seat." And what I soon came to realize is that she looked exactly like the mob outside. But she wasn't like them at all. She did everything you can imagine in that classroom with me. Not just my studies, but we played games, we did music, art. I knew that if I got past that mob every day and inside of the classroom, I was going to have a great day. And it was because of her. What I learned is that she looks like them. but she's nothing like them. She showed me her heart. And I knew at 6 years old that I am to never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin, or what they look like, where they come from. That is the lesson that I took away in that classroom, first grade, 6 years old. And it is the lesson that I continue to travel with, I continue to pass on to each and every child that I come in contact with. Later on, months and months later, I could hear kids. I could never see them, but I could hear them laughing and playing. And I would mention to my teacher, Mrs. Henry, I hear kids. She would never say a word. In the midst of me telling Mrs. Henry, I hear kids, what I did not know is that Mrs. Henry was going to the principal and constantly saying, you are breaking the law. Kids are to be together now. The law's changed, but you're hiding those kids from Ruby. And indeed she was. But Mrs. Henry fought and fought until she got them to take me to where those kids were. And I remember that day, we walked into another room. She opened a door that I'd never seen, and there they were, 4 or 5 kids sitting on the floor playing. And I remember thinking to myself, I knew I heard kids. I finally went in to sit down to play with them, because again, it didn't matter to me what they looked like. But that's when a little boy looked at me and he said, I can't play with you. My mom said not to play with you because you're a nigger. And when he said that, it felt like this huge weight lifted off my shoulders. Because at that moment, I realized it's not Mardi Gras. That's why there's no kids here. It's all because of me and the color of my skin. He made it make sense. And I no longer had to wonder what was going on and why I was the only kid in the school. Why did this have to happen to me? So when I look at where we are today, and I think about what's happening across my country and around the world, I can only think about that little boy who said, my mom said not to play with you. It wasn't that he understood, no more than I understood. Because none of our babies are born knowing anything about disliking one another. You're not only looking at Ruby Bridges, the little girl that integrated school back in 1960, but you're also looking at a mom who's lost a son to violence that we see plaguing our country. My son was murdered by someone who looked exactly like him. You see, racism has a way of making us think that we need to only trust people that look like us. We need to only be kind and love and come together with people that just look like us. I believe racism is evil. And I believe evil will use anyone that allows evil to use them. I believe evil stood over my son, shot him, and took him away from me. And that evil just happened to look like him. But in my country, you see that evil play out every day, and it looks like each and every one of us that live in that country. I thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of my story and hopefully to help you to understand what it was like for me and why I am who I am and why I continue to do the work that I do.